The hall smelled of cold wax and too many people breathing the same air twice. I stood where they put me, hands bound loose enough to remind me they could be bound tighter, and I listened to a room built by someone who hated voices. Marvel does that. It throws sound back flat and hard, and where two walls meet at the wrong angle, it folds an echo over itself until words arrive as mush. The architect had wanted grandeur. He'd got a standing wave that ate every mid-tone a man could make, which meant the prince could recite my ruin all afternoon, and the back rows would hear weather, not sentence. Prince Aldrich read from a scroll the length of his arm. His voice was good, trained even, pitched to carry, and the room swallowed it anyway. I watched the words die at the third column. By decree of the crown, the woman Sevra, called Lady, the flutter caught and smeared it into something uglier, and a girl near the dais flinched at a thing he hadn't said. I counted exits out of habit. Then I counted the men counting exits. One did it the way I do, eyes flat, chin still, a small tally running behind the face. He wore the regent's gray at the collar. He marked the two side doors, the servants' arch, the gap behind the throne, and when he reached the last of them, he let his shoulders drop a half-inch, satisfied. A man only loosens like that once he's decided how a thing ends. He had decided how I ended. The guards had decided nothing. They were bored. Boredom has a posture. Spear butts drifting off true, weight rocked onto one heel, a jaw working a back tooth. These men did not believe I would run, and they were right, and their certainty was the slackest thing in the room. A loose rope I filed away for later, the way you note which bean still holds before the roof comes down. The courtiers were the worst of them. They had arranged their faces into grief, and grief done properly cost something. A held breath, a tremor at the mouth, a hand that forgets itself. I saw none of that. I saw the small composed sorrow people wear at the funeral of a debt finally settled. Lady Sevra had owed them all something. Now the ledger closed, and they came to watch the ink dry, and one of them, a thin man in marten fur, had already half-turned to murmur about supper. 91 days to render the fort at Harrowmore fit for habitation, before first snow. That line the room let through. Having eaten 400 lines of legal throat-clearing, the marble chose to deliver the one that mattered, clean, into my good left ear. My right gave me nothing. It never does. So I leaned into the silence on that side the way you lean into a wall to feel a tremor through stone, and I let the hall tell me what the prince's mouth would not. Aldrich reached the foot of the scroll. 412 lines, and his voice had not once cracked. Then he looked at me, directly. Out of the whole cold box of mourners, his were the only eyes doing arithmetic instead of theater, and the sum he kept arriving at was not the comfortable one the regent's man had already settled. He thought I might live. The scribe gave me what the marble would not. His quill moved a half-beat behind the prince's mouth, and a nib tells its own story. The dip, the cut, the length of a stroke. I read numbers off the wrist the way I read a beam off its sag. 14. Short stroke, hard stop. 14 masons for a fort that wanted 40. And the man in marten fur tucked his mouth at the figure, pleased as a host who'd set the table himself. The word coin came next. After it, nothing. That nothing arrived clean across the whole hall. No purse, no levy, no credit drawn on the crown. The clerk's hand lifted and did not come back down, and the men who counted money felt a pleasant draft move through them. I took the last clause from the shape the room made around it. No courier rights. Harrowmore sits on a frontier the maps have stopped loving, and you cut a place's lungs when you cut its letters. A ruin. One season, 14 hands, no money, no word in or out. Fail and freeze. I had the terms. I went hunting the one no one had bothered to write. It lived in the gray-collared man 3 paces left of the dais. He had quit counting exits. He stood with the stillness of a task already filed, and when Aldrich reached the binding words, his chest let go. A long, low breath through the nose. The exhale of a man watching the final nail sink into a crate he'd packed himself. I have spent a life learning what breath does in a room. That one carried a clause. No one in the regent's house expected me to see another spring. The decree handed me autumn. His lungs handed me the rest. They had not sentenced me to a fort. They had sentenced me to a slow funeral and dressed it in carpentry, so the king could sign without looking up. Cold sat in my fingers, though no window stood open. I cannot be heard. Half my hearing is gone. My name is mud. My voice dies somewhere short of these bound wrists. They had filed that under my weaknesses. I began to file it elsewhere. A woman no one listens to is a woman no one guards a mouth around. They would talk across me like furniture and never feel the draft. So I would learn, one careless syllable at a time, everything they could not afford to say. I let my breath go long and slow, the way his had, and set myself to be underestimated. The gate bolt was thicker than my wrist, and it went home with a sound I felt in my teeth before I heard it. Iron seating in iron, a single low note the courtyard had no shape to hold. The hall was behind me. The cold took the rest. They put me on a flat cart behind 2 gray mules and a driver who had been told not to speak to me. Fine. I had nothing to say that the open road wouldn't waste. That was the thought that snagged, so I tested it. "How far to the first post?" I asked the driver's back. He didn't turn. 3 words pitched at his collar, and they left my mouth and went nowhere, thinned to a smudge over the rutted track, eaten by wind and frost-stiff grass and the long, flat run of the road itself. A voice dies on a long road. I had always known it as a fact. On the cart, I watched the mechanism do its work. Sound spreads. Off open ground, it climbs and is lost, and every yard of distance is a tax it cannot afford to pay. The driver, 8 feet off, heard me as weather. A man at 30 paces would hear nothing at all. That is why messengers ride and letters travel folded, because a voice, left to the air, surrenders. Unless you stop letting it spread. I shut my eyes against the glare off the rimed stones and built the thing in the dark behind the lids. A flat wall throws sound away. A curve keeps it. Cup a hand and the palm gathers what the fingers would have dropped. Set that same cup in fitted stone, aim its mouth down a channel of still air, and a whisper falls into the hollow and is held. Collected, folded, sent on along the line the curve has chosen. My old life had been nothing but fitting such curves to ceilings, so a singer at one end of a hall could be heard, unstrained, at the other. The road in front of me ran 12 days to Harrowmore. A road is only a hall with the roof torn off. Give it the right curve at the right intervals, a throat of stone here, another a half-mile on, and a voice need not ride at all. It could pour from one cupped wall to the next, faster than mules, quieter than any courier, and answer to no warrant the crown knew how to draft. The low note from the gate bolt was still sitting in my teeth. It changed pitch. Clean now, struck, certain. The sound a good beam makes when you finally load it true. Distance had been their last lock on me. No coin, no letters, a frontier with its lungs cut. They had trusted the open miles to keep my mouth 12 days from anyone who mattered. The road would carry me instead. I only had to teach it the shape. The light went the color of old pewter, and the road tilted up into pine. A wheel dropped into a frozen rut. The cart pitched hard. My hand was on the rail before I asked it to be. Weight low, weight back, knees giving with the lurch instead of bracing against it. I have never sat a horse. Whoever owned these hands had, and often. The driver checked the mules, not me. Good. I needed a moment alone with the stranger I was wearing. We stopped where a birch had come down across the track. He jerked his chin at me to step off and earn the ride. My boots found the verge without my looking. My palm went flat to a boulder furred white with rime, fingers walking its face for a seam, and the seam was there. Thumb hooked, knuckles set, a hold I had learned in no life I could remember. The frost bit clean to the bone. The hand didn't flinch. It knew this rock, or rock enough like it, and it took the grip the way a thing grips when it has gripped 1,000 times before. Her body. I kept setting it down and picking it up surprised. So I counted, the way you count sound timber before you trust a load to it. One ear, the left, good as a held note. The right, a stopped pipe. And a stopped pipe still tells you where the wall stands by what it refuses to pass. A name with mud on it, which is to say a name no one bothers to watch. A body that remembered skills its tenant did not. Hands fluent in reins, in stone, in who knew what else. All of it waiting under the skin to be asked the right question. 91 days. Less the 12 this road meant to swallow whole. We dragged the birch clear. I climbed back up, and my fingers closed on the cart rail at the exact worn place they had left it, as though they'd ridden 100 carts to my none. The pines drew shut over the track. My breath stood white a moment, then thinned to nothing, the way every word I'd spoken had thinned and gone since the gate. The cart stopped, and no one bothered to tell me why. I climbed down on my own. Harrowmore stood over the clearing the way a skull stands over a grave. The north curtain wall fallen inward in a long slope of rubble a goat could climb. Frost doing the work the mortar had quit. The chapel showed its broken ribs against a sky the color of a wet blade. Somewhere inside it, the wind found the nave and came back wrong, doubled, and 2 of the masons by the cart glanced toward the sound and away. 14 men. I counted them the way I'd counted rotted beams in the marble hall, once, and kept it. They had a fire lit before the mules were unhitched. The foreman took bread first, broad, a nose set crooked from an old break, and did not look to see who waited. 2 younger men did wait, hands jammed in their armpits, until he'd torn his piece. A thin one crouched close to the flame with a tremor in his fingers the heat never reached. Drink that. Another's hands shook quick and shallow, his eyes cutting to the chapel mouth and back. That one the place frightened. I filed both away. A frightened man and a thirsty man pull on different ropes, but they both pull. No one offered me a crust, no unkindness in it. They had not been sent a lady, they had been sent a delivery, and the delivery could see to itself. I walked the carts while they ate. 40 masons wanted, 14 given. I'd already swallowed that. 14 I could stretch, but a wall is not made of men. It is made of lime and sand and water and the patience to stand by while it cures. I went down the line of carts looking for the lime. Picks, mattocks, shovels worn to half moons, 2 crowbars the length of my arm, a barrow, a coil of new rope still pale at the cut. I turned back the last tarp myself, expecting the slaked lime sweating under wet sacking. Bare boards, frost in the grain. "Where's the line kept?" I asked the foreman. He chewed, took his time. "Weren't no lime on the writ." He drew a folded paper from his coat and held it out, not as courtesy, as proof he'd brought what he was told to bring. I read it by firelight. A clean clerk's hand, columns ruled straight, every item checked and totaled. Spades, 12. Mattocks, 8. Picks the same. Rope, cord by cord. The man who wrote it had not hurried, had not blotted a single figure. There was no lime on it because lime does not go into the ground. It comes out of it, into a wall, upward. This list went down. Every tool on it opened earth and moved what it broke and asked nothing at all of the sky. My thumb stopped on the line where mortar should have stood and found a sum instead. I did not fold the paper at once. The cold came into me by a colder road than the wind had used, up through the soles of my boots, and I made my hand give the writ back level and unhurried. The way you set a thing down once you've understood, they must not see that you understood it. Good list, I said. Straight columns. The foreman took it back, satisfied, and returned to his bread. 14 men then. Not masons sent to raise Harrowmore with me before the snow. Diggers, kitted to the last spade for the only structure the writ had ever costed. The kind you lower a person into, dug slow enough that the king could call it carpentry and never lift his eyes from the page. The wind came again out of the chapel, doubled and wrong, and counted off the days in a measure the stones already knew. The fire drew them into a ring, and the broad one sat at the thick of it, where the heat arrived first. I did not want him. Strength picks itself. It had picked him before I came, and a man who takes bread first takes credit first and blame last. I wanted the other thing, the one none of them had a word for. I walked the edge of the firelight to the chapel mouth and back, and watched whose voice changed. The thin drinker's didn't. He stayed loud the way cold men go loud, to prove the cold hadn't won. The broad ones didn't either. He pitched across the flames as if the dark owed him passage. The frightened one was different. Each time the wind came doubled out of the broken nave, his eyes cut to it and his voice dropped. Without his knowing, it dropped. He'd lean to the next man and speak low, and the low words carried clean to me where the loud ones had not. I crossed to him, asked his name. Dern. He said it to the fire, not to me. Why do you go quiet by the chapel, Dern? His shoulders came up. Don't like how it throws a man's words back. Comes back wrong. He worked his jaw. Like a second fellow saying it meaner. A second fellow saying it meaner. I have paid trained men who could not tell me that much about an echo. He felt the long axis of the nave gather his voice and hand it back a beat late, and it stood the hair up on his arms, and he had no name for any of it, only the sense to lower the volume the stone was punishing him for. The man understood sound. He just believed it was a haunting. You're foreman, I said. The broad one's head came round. I run this crew. You ate first. I let that sit. Different skill. I pitched it low, the way Dern had, so the fire's crack didn't eat it, and every man there leaned a hair to catch the words, which told them, better than shouting could, who they'd be leaning toward now. Something moved past the barrow, where no one had stood. A girl. Small, ragged, her hair in a felted rope, the sort of half-wild runner the carts pick up to ferry word between camps. She'd come up out of the dark without shifting a single stone, and she was watching my mouth the way Dern watched the chapel, wary, and sure there was something in it worth the watching. You heard that, I said. Quiet. Quieter than the fire should have let reach her. She nodded once. All of it? You named him for the wall. Just over a breath. Nobody else worked that out. No one had spoken to me since the gate. Now the first to choose it was a feral thing with ears like a stopped well gone deep, who had parsed a sentence the masons 2 feet from me had let pass. I have one good ear. The right is a pipe stopped long ago, and I had been counting, since the cart, on building a thing that would not need me to hear it raised. Here was a second pair, sharper than mine had ever been, walking up out of the frost to stand at my hip. "It's the water," the thin drinker said, for the third night running. "A man can't sleep through it." He didn't name the thing, because none of them had a name for it. Under the south range, a drop fell into standing water, and the dome over the old cistern caught the small click and threw it back fattened. Once a breath, never on the beat you braced for. Cold carries sound farther. This one had carried straight into all of them and worn the crew down to dropped tools and short answers by the third day. I took a lamp and Mira and went down. The stair sweated. My breath stood in the light, and the click came up the steps to meet me, louder below, the way a struck bull rings loudest at its lip. At the bottom lay black water and a vault of dressed stone, curving overhead to a single point. "Stand here." I set Mira under the crown of the dome. "Now 2 steps left. Tell me which is worse." "The middle," she said at once. "Middle's like it's inside your skull." Someone long dead had cut this ceiling to gather sound to its center, the way my old halls gathered a singer so she needn't strain. Now it gathered one falling drop and handed it, all night, amplified, to 14 men who needed to sleep. I lifted the lamp to the north curve. Water beaded out of a hairline crack and let go. A clean fall of a man's height into the pool, and the stone did the rest. They expected me to plug it. You cannot plug a moor. The water has to go somewhere or it finds a worse road. So I did the other thing. I unpicked a length of wool from my cuff, twisted it hard, and worked one end into the crack until the stone held it. The free end I trailed down to touch the water's skin. The bead swelled, met the thread, and took the easy way. It climbed into the wool and ran down silent, no fall left in it to make a sound. The click came once more. Then it stopped. We stood in what was left. Mira's mouth opened and shut. The dome, which had been saying the same mean word into the dark for 3 nights, said nothing at all. And the nothing was so clean I caught the lamp flame drawing breath. Through the floor above, a man laughed once in his sleep and turned over. By morning, no one called me witch. Worse than that, they looked at me the way you look at a person holding the only set of keys. Dern brought me bread unasked and set it down talking to the fire, the way he talks. The broad one said nothing, which, from him, was an oration. The rider came down the pine grade at midday, on a horse the crown could spare and we could not. She swung off easy, knocked the frost from a good wool cloak, and put out a bare hand as though Harrowmore were a music room and not a skull on a hill. "Coraline, they've sent me to observe." The smile had no cruelty in it. That is the costly kind. "And to write home how it all goes." Useful she was. By dark, she'd hauled water at Mira's side and never once asked why, and she warmed her boots at our fire like a woman with nowhere she'd rather be. The curves caught her. She found my charcoal on a flat stone, the dome, the crack, the angle of the throw, and crouched over the marks with her head tipped, reading them. "This isn't masonry. Light as breath." "What is it you're really drawing, my lady?" I gave her the small, true answer about ceilings and singers, and watched her fold the question away whole, the way you pocket a coin you mean to spend somewhere later. Somewhere a first report was already being written. I would not be shown a word of it. The first dish went up against the east scarp the morning the frost finally let the lime cure. We dressed the stones to a curve I'd scratched with a charred string pinned at one point. A wall that bellied inward, shallow as a cupped palm, taller than Dern by a head. The lime went on thin. We let it grip 2 days. On the third, I drove a stake at the spot my arithmetic gave for the focus and set Mira 40 paces down the slope, where the gathered voice was meant to pour into her like water into a jug. I stood at the stake and spoke low, the way you'd name a price you didn't want the next stall to hear. Nothing reached her. She cupped her good ear, frowned, shook her head. I tried again, a count, plain numbers, no music in them, and watched the words break apart against the stone and go nowhere, scattered up the scarp and lost to the moor wind. A mason behind me said it to his neighbor, not quite under his breath. 3 weeks dressing rocks so the lady can whisper at a wall. The neighbor's laugh was the kind men give when they want the first one to carry the risk of having laughed. The cold went into my knuckles where they gripped the stake. Here was the trap I'd built on the cart and forgotten to fear. I have one ear. The right is a stopped pipe. A woman who cannot hear cannot be trusted to say whether a thing carries, and every face on that scarp had just done the sum and got the answer the masons wanted. I did not argue. You cannot argue a stopped pipe back into hearing. I called Mira up instead. Walk the front of it, slow. Tell me where my voice is loudest, not where it should be, where it is. She knows that game. She played it under the cistern. She set her stopped well ear to the curve and crossed in front of the dish a step at a time, and 1.5 yards short of my stake, off to the left, she stopped dead. Here, her hand flat in the air. It's all here, inside my skull, the way the middle of the dome was. The voice had gathered. It had simply gathered in the wrong place, 1 yard from where my numbers promised, which put the fault in the stone, not in my ruined ear. I went to the dish with the plumb line and read it the way I should have read it dry. The lower arc had set proud. The lime had bellied out a finger's width along the bottom run where we'd troweled last and let it sag, and a finger of fat on a curve walks the focus a full yard down the line, the very yard Mira's hand was holding open in the cold. I pressed my thumb into the swollen lime, and it gave, soft still under the skin. The wall's true, I told Dern, who had come up saying nothing, which from him is a held breath. My ear's true, the curve isn't. I ran my thumb along the proud belly so he could feel where the stone had cheated me. We cut this back, 1/2 finger, the whole bottom run, to a chalk line I'll snap fresh. Then it pours where I set the stake, or my name's not on the decree that sent me here. He looked at the swelling. He looked at Mira's hand, still hanging in the empty air where the voice had been living all along. Recut, he said, to the dish, not to me, and reached for the chisel. The chisel rang the proud lime off in flakes, a finger's run down to the chalk line I'd snapped fresh at dawn. We let it grip 1 day. The frost stayed off the moor, its single courtesy. When the lime set hard, I did not put Mira 40 paces down the slope. I paced the dish's throw myself, out across the dead ground, past the burnt gorse and a sheep skull some shepherd had wedged on a cairn for luck, counting until my arithmetic gave out at 1/4 mile. There I drove the stake. The men came to watch. Failure makes better theater than work, and they'd dressed for it. Dern came because his hand had reached for the chisel, and a man wants to see what his hand has gone and promised. Stand at it, I told Mira, and sent her the 1/4 mile out to the far stake with nothing between us but heather and the wind dragging through it. Then I went back to the focus and faced the cupped stone. I'll tell you the part that ought to have frightened me. I had set Mira at a point I could not test with my own head, too far from my good ear, dead silence to my stopped one, a spot chosen by string and number and nothing else. A 1-eared woman picks her trust early. I trusted the meter of the stone. I spoke at the dish. Not a call. The voice you'd use to say, the soup wants salt. Mira, there's bread kept back under the gray hearthstone. Eat it before Dern's men go looking. The wind took the words off my lips, and the masons at my elbow heard only weather, because 1/4 mile is 1/4 mile. One snorted. He had his joke loaded, and his neighbor primed to laugh on cue. Far out, the small figure at the stake went still. Her arm came up straight. Then she ran, back across the dead ground at a flat sprint, Heather whipping her shins, and pulled up gasping in front of the whole crew with her cheeks blown red. "Bread," she said. "Under the gray hearthstone." She swallowed. "Before Dern's men go looking." She fixed me with that sharp, half-feral look. "You said it like you stood at my shoulder. Right inside the good ear. Soup quiet." Nobody laughed. I have stood in halls when a singer found the one note the room was built for, and the whole crowd forgot to breathe on the same beat. That held hush. Every chest stopped at once. This was that. The man with the joke shut his mouth on it. One mason pulled the cap off his head without seeming to know he'd done it. Dern set it to the cold ground between his boots, the way he'd have set it to a fire. A quarter mile. Plain talking voice. "To the inch my string promised," I said. "Here is the turn I'd kept folded in my chest since the cart. The stopped pipe was never the flaw they'd priced it at. I cannot lean on my own ear, so I never have. I lean on angle and run and the chalk line, on what the stone must do whether I hear it or not. A wall I cannot hear past still tells me where it stands by what it refuses to pass. The deafness wasn't the thing to pity. It was the thing that made me reach for the string instead of my own head." Mira stood getting her breath, the bread already half-eaten in her eyes, and behind her the dead ground ran flat and silent to the far stake, where my ordinary voice had walked the whole quarter mile and arrived unbent. And every man on the scarp looked out along that empty line as though they might still catch sight of it going. The crown rules by deciding who may speak to whom. I had not put it in those words until the second wall stood. We raised it on the west knuckle of the ridge to answer the east scarp's dish, the focus driven with an iron pin so a voice would have somewhere to land. 8 days of lime. The frost held off again, grudging as a creditor. Coraline climbed up while the top course was still dark with water, her crown horse left below to crop the gorse. She had a knack for arriving where the interesting thing was about to happen. I'd given up pretending not to notice. "Stand here," I said, and set her at the west focus. Then I walked the long arc east, past the cairn and its weathered sheep skull, until the two curved walls faced each other across a quarter mile of moor, with the wind dragging through the heather between. I spoke at my stone. Soup quiet. "Lady Coraline, the tea in your saddlebag is rosehip, not the Regent's black, and your secret is safe with the only deaf woman on the moor." Mira stood at my shoulder, watching the far figure. Coraline's hand went up to her mouth. Then her shoulders moved, laughing, a half beat before the thin return of the sound crept along the curve to where the runner could catch it, and I could not. She put her own mouth to the west wall and said a thing back. Mira heard it whole, and gave it to me word for word, and the warmth came up under my ribs uninvited. The way heat finds you through a wall you'd leaned against, not knowing it was warm. I set it on a shelf. That is the cold part, and I won't paint over it. The warmth was a true fact about a body short of comfort and grateful for any. A fact I could not yet afford to spend. So I filed it where I keep the other tools I'm not using, and I picked up the heavier thing that had come in alongside it. Coraline walked the arc back, breath up, color high in her cheeks. "It's a marvelous trick," she said. "You could sell it to every lord with a feud and a long valley." "It isn't a trick." I kept my voice level because the next part wanted level. "And it isn't a convenience." "What is it then?" "They sent me here with no courier rights. You read the same decree." I let that sit a breath. "A garrison that cannot send word is one the crown can starve quietly and bury as carpentry. That is the whole instrument of the thing. Who is permitted to reach whom, and who stands at the door to listen?" "Yes," she said slowly, watching my face now instead of the wall. "Now I can lay a plain talking voice across a quarter mile,
and no man between my lips and that far ear hears a syllable of it. I nodded down the dead ground to the east dish, small and patient on its scarp. Set a third wall at the throw of the second, a fourth at the third. The voice walks, past the gate readers, past the men paid to lean at doors, past every seal the regent ever pressed into wax to decide who may say what to whom. Her hand had stilled on the cold lime. The crown horse stamped below.
She is sent to write home which way I fail, and I watched her understand that I'd just handed her the single most dangerous line in the kingdom and called it masonry. "That's not a road," she said. "It's a road the crown can't stand at the end of." For a moment, neither of us moved, and the wind did all the talking. She looked at the two walls cupped toward each other across the empty miles, then back at me, and something went careful behind her eyes that had been open a breath before. I marked the exact instant the warmth in her changed weight, became a thing I would have to account for. There it was, plainly. The woman I'd just let myself like is the one who decides which letter rides south. The warmth and the risk wore the same face. They always do, on the people worth the warmth. Mira was already counting the slope for the next focus, lips moving, half feral and entirely practical. I made my choice on that wall, with my palm flat on stone still cold enough to ache the bone. Coraline would see the second dish work. She'd carry the wonder of it home if she chose, the Lord with his valley, the charming trick. She would not learn how far the chain could reach, nor that I meant to build it, until the building was too far along to stop with one report. "Down you go," I told her, light as the rosehip, "before your horse decides the gorse is dinner." She went. I stayed, and snapped my chalk line for the third wall before her boots reached the grass. The drumhead was a goat's hide I'd begged off Dern, scraped thin enough to read a candle through. I stretched it over an ash hoop, wet, and let the moor wind dry it tight overnight. By morning it rang under a fingernail like a struck cup, or so Mira told me, the ring being hers to hear and mine to take on faith. I didn't need the ring. I needed the skin to move when sound touched it, and I had a way to see that move which no ordinary ear would ever stoop to. Sand. A palmful sieved through a square of Coraline's discarded muslin until only the fine gray grains came through. I set the hoop at the focus of the second dish, the still point where a quarter-mile of moor folds its sounds down to a coin of air. Then I cast the sand across the skin and waited for the world to talk into it. A boot scuff, far off. The grains crawled, swept toward two faint ridges, and went still. There it was. I could look at a sound. The thing my one ear loses on open ground, the hide caught, and the sand drew for me in lines a child could follow. Mira hummed low against the east wall, a quarter-mile gone. The grains leapt and settled into a clean pair of crescents. She climbed a note. The crescents broke and remade themselves into a four-petaled figure, neat as frost on a pane. Every pitch its own picture. I scratched each onto a slate, a dictionary of shapes for sounds I would never hear, so the wall could speak to me in a script of shivering grit. That first night I left the hoop standing and a lamp low beside it, more from an engineer's tidiness than any expectation. Dead frontier. No couriers by decree. That was the whole shape of my sentence. The sand should have lain still till dawn. It didn't. Past the deep of the night, the grains began to move on their own. I dozed against the cold stone, the ache of it gone all the way into the wrist bone. What woke me wasn't the lamp. It was the sand, catching the light as it stirred. I leaned in close enough to fog the muslin with my breath. The grains gathered into one of Mira's flowers, held, scattered, gathered again. Then a pause, counted off in nothing. Then the figure once more, twice quick, once long. Not wind. Wind smears the skin to a blank. Not a fox in the gorse either. Those throw their own ugly scrawls, and I'd already learned to read them and discard them. This was spaced, measured. A hand somewhere out in the empty miles was tapping a thing meant to carry down a relay, and the rhythm of it ran in the long and short that runners drink with their mother's milk, the crown's own drum grammar for walking word through the dark. I crossed the floor and put a hand on Mira's shoulder. She came awake without a sound, the way she does everything, and I pointed at the skin. She watched the grains go through their figure twice more. The sleep went out of her face like water off a tilted slate. "That's a relay hand," she whispered. "Acknowledge and pass. I've run it." "From where?" She tipped her chin north and east, toward the border I'd been sent to die quietly against. "Out there, where there's nobody left to send it." The sand shivered once more, patient, repeating, and drew for me in gray grit the one thing the decree swore was not on this moor. A courier, working, on a frontier the crown had buried as dead. The lamp guttered. I cupped it close because a flicker is a lie the sand will copy, and tonight I needed the grit to tell me only the truth. Mira had her good ear laid flat to the dish's focus, where a quarter-mile of dark folds down to a coin of air. I had the hide. Between us, the moor gave up its secret twice over, her version in words, mine in moving sand. "It's changed," she whispered. "That's not the relay anymore. Somebody's talking underneath it." The grit agreed. The clean long and short of acknowledge and pass had gone soft, the figures sliding into one another the way running speech does, too fast for my slate to catch whole. I caught fragments, a crescent I'd logged as a long vowel, the frost flower that meant a hard stop of breath. "Words," I said. "I can't lift words off sand. Give me words." She went still, lips moving a half beat behind the air, the way a careful translator's do. "Won't last the thaw," she breathed. "The old man won't last the thaw. They mean the king." "Sevra. They're saying Haldor won't last the thaw." I held my chalk over the slate and drew nothing. The hide had no figure for that. No courier carries a king's dying down an open relay. This rode some other curve entirely, a private channel the crown's runners were never handed. "There's more," Mira said. "After him. They're naming who comes after." "Say it the way they say it." "A regency, made..." Her brow folded over the word. "Permanent, sealed before the snow, before the borders moved." The cold that lived in my wrist bone slid up past the bone, into the chest, and sat there. "A name," I said. "There's always a name on a thing like that. Find me the name." She pressed her cheek to the stone until it must have hurt. The sand drew a figure I knew at once. 2 crescents set back to back, the shape one particular opening always makes, and then the night wind stepped a hand's width sideways and wiped the rest to gray blank. "Half," Mira said. "I only caught half of it." She gave me the half, and I knew the half, not the whole. The moor had swallowed that and would not cough it up again, but enough that my hand stopped dead on the slate, because I had heard that opening said aloud once, in a hall floored with marble built to throw a voice, by a man counting my 91 days into the air as evenly as a chandler measures wick. I looked at the hide. It lay flat and quiet now. The wind had walked off the focus and taken the rest of the sentence with it, and there is no asking the wind to repeat itself. That was the whole cruelty of the thing. I held treason in 2 pairs of ears and a palm of grit. A king's death scheduled like a cartload of lime, a crown promised before a border was sold, half a name I could already fit to a face I'd stood 3 feet from. and not a grain of it would carry to a court. I cannot hear the line myself. A half-deaf woman who swears on her runner's ear and on shapes in sand is a witch, by any law with a roof over it. Mira waited, watching me, ready to be told what we'd just heard. I drew the edge of my hand across the skin and brushed the figures back to nothing. Some proof you can set on a table for clean men to frown at. This one I could only carry. Alone, unrepeatable, already worth my throat the moment I breathed it at the wrong door. "Where would the next one stand?" Coraline asked, and laid her gloved finger along the cold parapet, as if she could already feel the curve in the stone. I should have heard the question for what it was. A surveyor's question, wearing a guest's coat. "It doesn't stand anywhere yet," I said. "It stands where the land lets a voice run downhill without snagging on anything." "Then show me where the land lets it." The frost on the parapet had gone to beads under the early sun. I put my palm flat where she'd pointed, felt the cold come up through the wool into the old ache, and looked out along the line she'd chosen. Not to indulge her, only to refuse her cleanly and be done. That was the error. I looked. The ridge ran under us east to west, a spine of gray rock the survey maps drew as a smudge and nothing more. Below the east scarp, the river road unspooled toward the marches. West, the moor stepped down in long folds to border stones I'd never stood near enough to read. From this one parapet, my eye took both at once. I had raised 2 dishes thinking only of the quarter-mile between them. Coraline was still talking, the patience of the curve, how I could be sure the focus fell just there and not a yard off. I heard her the way you hear rain on a roof you've stopped worrying about. My attention had gone down the slope and would not come back. A man who means to sell a border first has to watch it. He has to know which gate opens for coin, which captain looks the other way, which courier still runs a frontier he's swearing to the king is empty and dead. From Harramore's ridge, a chain of curved walls could lay an ear on every yard of that. Sound runs where sight runs, and farther, and around the corners besides. The regent had not been careless with me. I'd let myself believe the ruin was an insult chosen at random, the worst hole in the kingdom handed to a woman he wanted quietly gone. It was the opposite of random. It was the only ridge that mattered. He'd buried me on the one ground in the realm from which the thing I'd been building since the Lyme cured could see a whole border breathe. Not to die in an indifferent grave, to die on schedule, before the snow, with a finished instrument standing on the ridge, ready for a hand that would not be mine. "Sevra." Coraline had turned from the moor. "You've gone somewhere I can't follow." "Counting beams." True on most mornings. She didn't believe me. She was courteous enough to leave it, and her leaving it landed warmer than the morning had any right to, and I lifted that warmth off the bench and set it on the shelf with the other tools I wasn't spending today. The wind came up off the east scarp and worked cold fingers under my collar. Last night's grit came back with it, the relay running clean through this air, acknowledge and pass, on a frontier sworn to be without a living soul. The signal hadn't crossed this ridge by accident. It crossed because someone had already chosen this ridge, long before I came rattling up the track behind silent mules. I made myself ask it plainly, the way I'd teach a mason to cite a true line. Who else knows the ground talks here? The decree said 14 masons, no coin, no courier. It had not said why this skull of a fort, on this exact spine, when the kingdom keeps emptier ruins by the dozen. I'd taken the silence for indifference. Indifference doesn't pick a ridge to the foot. "You'll build a third," Coraline said. Not a question. Her gaze had gone back along my sight line, west, toward the stones I couldn't read, and she was smiling at the shape of it the way she'd smiled at the cistern sketch. I let her smile. I gave her the quarter-mile and kept the 200 miles, because the same eye that had measured this ridge for me had measured it before me, and that I knew to the day when the snow would close the only road off it. The peg where the long calipers hung was bare. I knew that rack better than my own hands. Chisel, plumb bob, the brass dividers Coraline pretended not to notice me favoring. 3 pegs empty this morning, not borrowed. Borrowed tools come back at the bell. These had gone out the way water leaves a cracked cistern, quietly, toward nowhere I could name. Dern found me counting the gaps. Mira says the east dish sounds wrong. We set the goat hide skin at the recut focus, sand sieved fresh through muslin, and Dern spoke his own name into the far dish a quarter-mile off. Mira's chin came up at the ring. I watched the grains move and waited for the clean-spaced figure I'd read 100 times. It came up, shoved sideways. Not wind. Wind smears the skin blank, and this was sharp, measured, only landed a finger's width off where it had struck for a month. A focus that had gone walking in the night. Stone settles. Green lime sighs in the first hard frosts, and an honest curve can drift a hair and blame the weather. I climbed the scarp to read the wall by hand. The third course from the focus had moved. Not fallen, moved. The bed joint packed a shade proud on the inner face, exactly the fault a lazy, proud lime build throws on its own and a tired inspector forgives. My thumb pressed the mortar. Still soft where it should have set to bone. Someone had wetted back and reseated the stone overnight, off the true line by a thumb's width, then smoothed the joint so the lie would cure by noon. Just subtle enough to read as settling. I had taught them that tell myself, standing in this wind, naming it a builder's worst habit. That night I set the skin and read the relay alone, with the cold coming up through the parapet into the old ache in my palm. Acknowledge and pass first, the crown's tidy grammar, running clean over a frontier sworn to be empty and dead. Then a longer figure beneath it, spaced and human, one I didn't know. Under my finger the grains drew it into numbers I knew to the half-inch, the rise of the tower, the focal length of the recut dish, the seating angle of a curve I had never written down for a living soul. My geometry. Going east. I'd sealed that sketch in wax and carried it nowhere. It had crossed 200 miles ahead of me anyway, in a hand that knew which figures mattered and dropped the rest. I sat very still and let the cold do my counting. No courier had ridden the snow to copy a drawing folded inside my own coat. No spy had scaled a roofless fort in the dark to measure a wall to the half-inch. The tools went out through a door someone held open from within. The course was reseated by hands that knew the one tell I'd never spoken outside this ridge. And the numbers now sliding east were the exact numbers I had said aloud, plainly, trusting, to the 14. The dish hadn't been struck from the marches. It had been struck from across my own yard. I brushed the sand flat and held my hand over the silent skin until it stopped shaking. The knife wasn't coming for the wall. It was already mortared into it. Cold turns a breath into evidence. I had the 14 lined at the lime pit before the bell, palms out for the day's tasks, and I watched the white plume leave each mouth. A steady man breathes on his own clock. So I laid one false stone into an ordinary order. We'd recut the west dish today, I told them, the dish I had no intention of touching. Then I watched the breath. 13 plumes kept their measure, one snagged. A breath drawn and not spent, the white cloud hanging half a beat behind the rest, the way wet lime hesitates before it takes the trowel. His eyes went to the west dish when I named it. Went, then worked very hard at not going back. A caught breath is not proof. It is only a place to point the rest of me. I knew one whole corridor in that ruin, the passage past the tool rack, where the flags ring over a hollow I'd never bothered to fill. Every man crossed it 100 times a day. I'd learned their treads the way I learn a wall by hand. Dern rolls through on his heels. The water carrier scuffs. The bread-first man I passed over for foreman still stamps 3 months on like the floor owes him an apology. That night I sat with my palm flat to the cold flag at the corridor's mouth and let the void under the stone do my listening. It carries each step up into the heel of the hand, cleaner than my ruined ears have managed in years. Men came and went. I matched each gate to a name and let it pass. One tread had changed since yesterday. Near the rack it went short and quiet, the weight set down soft, the way you lay a stone you don't want anyone to hear land. 3 careful paces over the hollow, then the old confident stride once he was past it. I held still and made him repeat it. He did, twice more before the watch changed, and twice more he tiptoed across his own floor for no reason an honest man would own. Breath and footstep agree, or they don't. These agreed. Morning. I put them at the wall and walked the line slow, the slate cold against my forearm, marking tasks I didn't care about so my eyes would have somewhere ordinary to be. I came to him last. I named a course and asked, easy as weather, whether the east focus had wandered in the frost. The half-beat came before the word. That gap a lie needs to dress itself, the breath catching the way it had at the lime pit, the eyes flicking once toward the east dish and snapping back like a plumb bob overcorrected. Settling, my lady, he said. Smooth after the catch, always smooth after the catch. Held breath, soft tread, a tongue that found the right word a fraction too late. Taller. The lean one with the careful hands who had seated the proud course and called it the wall's own bad habit to my face, who had stood in this wind while I taught him the very tell he'd used to bury his work in plain sight. I marked his task on the slate like any other man's, and I said nothing at all. Who hands a bricklayer the half-inch? Taller set the stone. Taller doesn't draft a regency between courses of rubble. Someone fed him my numbers and the patience to bury them slow. Someone with the run of my yard and the crown's ear at the far end of it. I had the name before I let it surface, and it surfaced easy because it was the one I half wanted. Coraline. The observer the regent posted to watch me raise his instrument, who asked in a guest's coat where my next dish would stand. It would tie off clean. If she was the knife, then the evenings across the brazier, her sorting my lime samples by smell, snorting at the cistern story until the steam fogged her collar, were a lie. And a lie I can pour cold water on and walk away from. You bury a traitor in an afternoon. The other thing keeps you at the wall past the watch bell. So I baited her, and I made the bait 2 numbers. One worthless, the depth of the spoil heap, a figure no soul east of this ridge would pay a copper to know. One that mattered, the recut dish's true focal length, the load-bearing number, the one I'd watched ride 200 miles ahead of me through frost I couldn't cross. I watched her hands. She wrote them both. Same stub of pencil, same flat weight. The spoil heap logged above the focus, in a ledger she left open between us, with the spine cracked toward me so I could read every line upside down. The depth of a dirt pile and the heart of a whole border, set down in one even clerk's hand. Neither one granted more ink than the other. The hand sliding east drops the chaff. It kept my focal length and let my worthless numbers lie where they fell. A thief's economy. Selective, knowing exactly which figures were freight and which were straw. Coraline kept all of it. She kept it the way an honest steward keeps a granary tally, complete and dull and built to be read by whoever asked. An informer who bothers to record the spoil heap is informing on no one. The simpler answer went out like a coal under wet snow, slow, with a little hiss of regret. I'd wanted it to be her. Wanting a thing and proving it are different rooms, and I do my work in the second one. She caught me watching her pencil. Said nothing about it, only nudged the brazier an inch across the flags toward my side, toward my hands, the iron grating once on stone. I let it warm them. Then I closed her ledger, thanked her for the cold company, and went out into the yard to find the hand that knew which numbers to keep. Bren counted the bread. I'd been reading The Men Who Set Stone and missed the one who set down numbers for a living, the ration tally, every man's loaf, a reason to hold figures in his head and nobody curious why. I found him in the store shed past the watch bell, a tallow lamp guttering, grain sacks stacked white with their own frost. His knuckles were split from the cold. He was moving his lips over the count when I shut the door behind me, and the count stopped. "You're short a sack," I said. "You've been short a sack for 9 days." "Settling of the pile, my lady." Too fast. I let the lie sit in the cold between us and watched it fail to dress itself. "Tola learned my focal length from someone. Tola can't read my hand. You can. You count for me." He didn't run. He set the sack down soft, the way Tola laid his quiet stone, and I understood I'd been hearing the same careful weight in 2 men and calling it 1. "Show me your coat." He didn't move, so I crossed and opened it myself. No coin, no letter from a regent's clerk. A child's mitten, gray wool, one thumb darned with the wrong color thread. That was the whole of his payment, and it told me what I'd been too clever to guess. "They have your people." His face came apart slow, the way mortar lets go. No crack, just a long give. 3 of them. My wife, the girls. The voice scraped. "A man came to the valley before the frost, said the winter would be hard on a family with no grain and no roof. Said it needn't be. Said he wanted the long numbers off the lady's slate, never the short ones, only the long." He swallowed. "I didn't know what they were for." I believed him. A man who'll sell a kingdom keeps the coin. A man bought with his children's winter keeps the mitten. Here is what I learned about myself in that shed, the tallow stinking, my breath hanging. No rage came. What came was the cold click of arithmetic, the same I feel when a course runs true. Because Bren was no longer a knife in my crew. Bren was a wire I now held both ends of. "You'll keep sending," I said. He looked up. "You'll send what I give you. Long numbers, off my slate, in my hand. They'll be wrong by exactly as much as I choose, and the men at the far end will build their whole case on rot and never taste it." I crouched to his level, close, so the words carried no farther than him. "Your wife stays warm. The crown stays fed lies. You go on counting bread." "What if they learn?" "They won't, if you hold your tread honest and your face dull. You're good at dull." A grace I didn't feel, handed over flat. "You held it from me 3 weeks." He nodded, the mitten still fisted in his hand. I set the first false number in him there, the recut focus, off by a thumb's width the wrong way, a figure that would walk 200 miles and arrive a ruin. I watched him take it and tuck it away, and I felt my own hands do the thing they do on the wall. Choose the stone, test the bed, seat it where it bears the load I need it to bear. He was a frightened father with split knuckles. I had just dressed him like rubble and laid him into my course. The lamp threw our 2 shadows up the frosted sacks, mine the taller. I told myself a finished instrument was worth a used man. Then I wished him good night and meant the small kindness in it, and walked out into a yard where I no longer entirely trusted the one set of hands that had always been my own. The 3rd dish faced north, into Mirafen, where black water stood between dead willows and the road drowned at every thaw. We'd cut its bowl from green oak, lined it with hammered tin, and set it on the new wall like a beggar's cup turned up to the weather. Dern thumbed the rim. Too shallow. It'll hear, but it'll lie about where from. Then we aim by ear and trust no faith, I said, and we did. Mira lay belly down on the parapet, the sand drumhead under her chin the way she liked it, fine river sand on stretched hide, grains that walked when sound walked. She read their walking better than I read a slate. Cold had got into my knuckles by then, the deep kind that makes a pencil clumsy, and I worked them against my palm and waited. A trade road came in first, faint. A teamster 2 valleys off, cursing a mired axle in a dialect that rounded its vowels, and the curse arrived on our ridge clean enough to spell. Dern grinned without showing teeth. He doesn't know we're here. He doesn't know anywhere is here, I said. That's the point of a road no one keeps. We swung the bull a hand's width east, toward the gray shoulder of hill where Grey Cow Monastery kept its bells and its grain and its long silence. Mira went still. The grains on the drumhead shivered, gathered, marched a thin furrow toward the western edge. Voice, she breathed. A man. Praying. No, counting. I leaned to the listening cone. A reedy line of words came down it, thin as smoke under a door, and resolved into a brother reckoning sacks of winter barley aloud in the old church count, by sevens. Speak back, Dern said. Can we? We could. The west dish carried my soup-quiet voice a 1/4 mile. This chain, course by course, carried it farther than any horse rode in a day. I set my mouth to the focus and pitched it low, the register that travels. Grey Cow, you're heard. Harrowmore sends greeting. The counting stopped. A long pause, the kind a man takes when the wall has spoken and he's deciding whether to be afraid of it. Then the reedy voice came back, careful, picking each word like a stone from cold ground. Harrowmore is a ruin. The lady there is dead, or will be. The lady there has a cold and a great deal of work, I said. What do you want, brother, that the world might give you? Another pause. When he answered, the want came out of him plain, the way want does when a man has carried it too long to dress it up. To speak, to know if the river road holds, to hear a voice that isn't ours before the snow shuts us in. We have grain, more than we can eat, and no cart that survives the mire to sell it. I felt the thing turn under me, quiet, structural, the way a keystone takes its load and the arch stops being a pile of hopeful stones and becomes an arch. Then we trade, I said. Your barley for your voice. You'll talk to Mirafin, to the road, to me. You'll know the river before it takes your bridge. I let the next part sit flat, no weight on it. And you'll feed 14 masons who'd rather not starve being clever. Dern was looking at me. Mira had lifted her chin off the drum. This had been a grave. The regent measured the ridge to the foot, buried me where a finished instrument could be lifted from my dead hands, and never once asked what an instrument does between the building and the dying. It speaks. It speaks to whoever owns the angle, and the angle, this morning, was ours. By sevens then, brother, I said. Send your count. The grains began to walk again, steady, a furrow of barley arithmetic crossing the hide toward me. Out past the parapet, the willows of Mirafen stood black in their black water, and above them, the sky had gone the flat pewter that means snow within the week. And for the first time, the ridge did not feel like the bottom of anything. Snow held off one more day than the sky had promised. Grey Cow's barley came first, sledged over the frozen mire on green oak runners, and the people came up behind it, because people follow the thing that keeps them alive. I read them from the parapet the way I read a strange room, for where the weight sat. Not a column. A drift. A woman leading a goat on a frayed rope. 2 boys carrying a door between them because a door is a roof and a table, and if it comes to that, a beer. An old man counting his steps aloud so he would not have to count the things behind him. They did not love me. It showed in the set of shoulders, in how a mother angled her child to her far side under the gate. The lady of Harrowmore, sent here to die, who'd had the bad manners to refuse. I made no speech. A speech needs a voice that carries and an ear to gauge it, and I trust neither of mine. So I built instead. We had walls. I put them to work. A low course of rubble I'd meant for a windbreak became a queue, because a wall tells a frightened crowd where to stand without a single soldier raising his voice. Bren stood at the grain with his slate and his sevens, counting in, counting out. A clerk holding figures no one questions. Dern set the strongest newcomers to courses they could not ruin. Order came up out of the stone, not down from my mouth. The North Tower was Mira's before I named it. She'd worn a hollow in its capstone with her own belly, the sand drum forever under her chin. I climbed up with a hidebound door and hung it on leather straps, set a brazier in the corner, laid a second drumhead beside the first. Yours, I said. The listening's yours. No one climbs these stairs you don't allow. She studied the door a long while. Mine, she said, testing the word like a coin she half suspected of being false. A tanner named Pell came up the ridge on the 3rd day, with frost in his beard and a rolled writ in his coat, the kind the crown nails to market posts. He kept touching it like a sore tooth. There's a courier 2 valleys back, he said. He'll have my name for tearing this down. No royal couriers reach here, I said. No post, no taxman reads what crosses this ridge. He didn't believe it. I watched the disbelief work against the want, the same fight I'd seen in the brother at Greycowl. A man weighing whether good news could be trusted at all. Why not? He said at last. Why does the king's road stop short of you? So I told him plain. The regent buried me on a ridge no courier rides, because no one keeps the road, because the place oversees a whole border and answers to nobody. Pell squinted past me to the dishes ranged along the wall, the green oak cup, the recut bowls turned up to the weather. The goat woman had drifted close. So had a dozen others, the way cold people gather to anything that might be warm. They said you were the villainess of Harrowmore, Pell said. Stone deaf and gone mad with it, talking to walls. The first part's slander, I said. The second's nearly true. I hear stone better than I hear speech. I built ears I could trust, because the ones I was born with quit on me a long time ago. The goat woman spoke before he could answer. Then a deaf woman's made the one road in the kingdom the king can't listen on. She said it slowly, fitting it together as she went. We carry you our news, and it goes where he can't tax it. Where he can't read it, I said. She laughed, short, startled. The first warm sound that ridge had held in a week. Gift of God, that deafness, she said. Begging your pardon, my lady. I did not argue scripture with a woman who'd walked her goat across a frozen fen. Above us, Mira's drum had begun to whisper. Barley counts, road word, a stranger's voice from somewhere down the mire. The grains walking their thin furrow toward a girl who, for the first time, had a door she was allowed to shut. Below, Pell let his writ fall open in his hand and reached for a slate. Read me the works clause again, I said, slowly. Coraline had carried the decree itself, not a scribe's copy. The seal, a disk of wax gone the brown of old liver. She unfolded it on the slate where Mira's drum usually sat. Her gloved finger found the line. She read. I'd heard it twice and filed it as boilerplate, the crown forbidding me a garrison I had no men to raise. No works of signal or relay shall the holder raise upon the march, nor maintain commerce of word with any party the crown has not sanctioned. I had read it as a denial, a locked store with nothing in it. Standing in the wind off the dishes, I read it as a definition. Again, I said, the middle. Nor maintain commerce of word, Coraline said. Commerce of word. I'd traded barley for voice with Greycowl. Pell had carried his news up the ridge and let it cross where no taxman could read it. The goat woman had named the thing exactly, and I'd been fool enough to warm my hands at it. The dishes turned their pale mouths to the valley. Each one was a crime, finished and signed in lime. He didn't bury me to fail, I said. The cold made my own voice strange, a thing felt in the jaw more than heard. Die under a roofless fort, and that's an accident, a widow's pension. But a frontier that can speak to itself without his leave is treason, Coraline said. By his own word, written before you turned to stone. So the decree had 2 doors, and the same wall behind each. Die on the ridge, on schedule, and be mourned as unlucky. Live, and raise the very thing that proves me a traitor. He'd drawn the room so every exit opened onto one fall. I almost admired it. Clean work, the way a course runs true. Coraline did not let me linger there. She drew a second square of oilcloth from her coat and set it beside the decree. 2 leaves of paper, both in her own hand, both unsealed. I send the regent an account at each thaw, she said. She kept her eyes on the slate. I have for the whole of it. That was the price of my coming up here. I had known there was a price. Costly warmth keeps the receipt somewhere on its person. This one says Harrimore stands, she said. Walls, water, grain, people. The truth. Her fingertip moved to the other. This one says the fort failed. The lady's work came to nothing. The ridge is bare. Truth makes you a traitor by spring. The lie buys you a winter. After that, I can't see. The wind found the gap in the door leather and worried it. Below, Bren's slate scratched its careful poisoned 7s, and somewhere the goat complained at the cold. 2 papers on a stone, and a woman who'd been bought asking me which one she ought to make true. Don't choose yet, I said. The courier's 2 valleys back. He won't wait on the snow. I know what's behind me, Coraline. I built it. I laid 2 fingers on the green oak cup, highest of them, the one that reached the trade road. Give me until he calls for it. She folded both leaves away, the truth and the lie nesting together against her ribs, and went down to thaw her hands at the brazier. I stayed up top a while. The light flattened to the gray that comes before a fall. When I put my palm back to the green oak cup, the wood had changed under it. A glaze had crept across the bowl, thin as breath caught on glass, the first frost of the year taking the highest dish for its own. It would not be the last thing the cold came up here to claim. Mira's hand closed on my shoulder before I'd climbed clear of sleep. She never spoke, but the grip said, North Tower, now. The floor woke the soles of my feet. Outside, the dark had gone soft and grainy. Snow, 3 weeks before any almanac gave me leave to expect it. Dry as milled flour and squeaking under her boots as she hauled me up the stair. The sand on the drumhead would not lie still. It crawled, a low ridge building and slumping along the rim that faced the trade road. I laid my fingers to the skin and read the patient thing under the loud one. Hooves. Not one, not a pair. A column at a walk, far down the frozen mire, on the only footing the freeze had left open. Count them, I said. Mira spread both hands, closed them, spread one. 12 and some. Enough for an escort, too few for an army, which was the worse of the 2 readings, because fear rides in numbers, and confidence rides in a tidy dozen who expect no trouble. Coraline came up behind a candle, her breath smoking, boots unlaced. "The courier," she said. "He didn't come for my paper alone." "No." "There's a banner, folded for the snow, but I saw it shaken out at the ford." She wet her lip. "Inspection." Inspection. A word with excellent manners, and not one of them honest. I went to the south slit and pulled the leather. The cold came in flat against the face, and below, where the mire had whitened under its early skin, the column was a dark seam stitching itself toward the ridge, unhurried, sure of its welcome. I'd been counting on a courier and a pen. Send Coraline's lie down the valley. The fort failed, the ridge bare, and by one winter while the snow turned the road to rumor. That plan needed the regent to read about Harrowmore. He had decided to come and look at it instead. The declaration's already written. The certainty came cold and clean, the click of a course running true. He didn't send men to find out whether I'm a traitor, Coraline. He sent them to witness it. The dishes turn. They're cut, cured, standing in plain lime where any fool can read them. I cannot make a quarter-mile of finished stone vanish under a lie before that banner reaches my gate. Her hand went to her ribs, where the two papers nested. Then I send the truth, or I send nothing, and it's the same thing. It's the same thing. 2 clocks, and both run fast. Winter's, 3 weeks ahead of its hour, already sealing the only road behind that column so no one rode out the way they'd ridden in. The regents, faster still, arriving to see with eyes what no paper could be trusted to carry. Every schedule I'd built leaned on having more time than the other man, and both of them had just taken it from me on the same gray morning. I put my palm to the drum beside Mira's. The ridge of sand had changed its note. The column had stopped. "Why would they halt at the foot?" Coraline said, "with the gate in sight?" I didn't answer. The grain was telling it before I could. A thinner ridge broke from the broad one and ran out ahead, fast, alone, a single horse leaving the column to take the last mile at a gallop the snow should have forbidden. Someone wanted to reach my gate before the witnesses did. Below, the green oak cup ticked. Not frost this time, but a voice walking the wood, thin as a nail drawn down linen. Bren had his good ear to the bowl before I cleared the stair. His ruined hand lay flat on the page to keep the draft from lifting it. Barley dust still grayed his cuff from the grain count. The candle put his face the color of cold tallow. "It's the inbound," he said, not looking up. "Their line into mine. Theirs to me, not mine out." The wire I held both ends of. All winter I'd fed his masters a careful nothing, and now they fed back, never guessing the reader had turned over inside their fist. "Don't write it," I said. "Speak it as it comes. Their order, their words. Leave none out." He swallowed. Then he gave me their mouths. "Rider ahead of the column. He carries the regent's hand. Open the gate to him alone." Bren's lips moved a beat behind the wood. "When he is inside," a gap, the channel thinning to breath. The dishes come down. Lime broke, frames to the brazier. Before the witnesses climb, the ridge shows nothing but a fallen wall and a sick woman. My knuckles had quit aching. Strange what pain the body sets down when the mind goes flat and starts to measure. "Go on." "The regent stands at your gate at the 3rd bell." The cup hissed. He leaned closer, chasing it. "He carries south one report, one only." His voice failed for a word, and the wood ticked on without him until he caught it up again. "That the Lady of Harrowmore laid no stone and lit no signal. That the first frost took her in the opening week. That the ridge is bare and the king's mercy spent on a woman already dead." The brazier popped a knot of pine. Far off, under the floor, I could feel the gallop still coming. One horse, the snow no obstacle to a man with a schedule. "Finish it." His Majesty signs the border away. Bren read, grieving a dutiful subject. He does not ask. He was never meant to ask. There it was, laid on the table between us like a drawing handed over for approval. Not treason. They'd reached for treason and found a colder tool. A traitor wants trying, and a trial wants the king's eye, and the king's eye was the one thing the whole sentence had been built to keep shut. So they would not call me a traitor at all. They would call me nothing. A drafty fort, a quick frost, a name to sign past on the way to the next page, and the work, every cured course and recut dish that had nearly carried me out of the grave, torn down and burned before a single witness could swear it had ever stood. He meant to bury the proof I'd lived, so the proof could not embarrass the lie that I'd died early and done nothing. I put 2 fingers to the green oak bowl. The glaze of morning frost had melted under the voice that crossed it. The wood was wet, warm almost, alive with a man 2 valleys off speaking my funeral. The writer, I said, he doesn't come to declare me. He comes to dress the set before the audience arrives. Bren's jaw worked. And he can't dress it without the gate open to him alone, without a hand inside that knows which dish reaches where, which lime is green and which will crack. I watched the understanding climb his face the way frost climbs glass. Without you. The cup had gone quiet. The instruction was given. Somewhere a man believed it received and obeyed. I had been handed the hour they'd come, the words they'd speak over the king, and the precise small hinge the whole machine turned upon, and the hinge was sitting at my table with barley on his sleeve, waiting to learn which way I'd let him swing. A report can go south in 2 hands, Coraline said. She'd come down behind me, soundless. I never catch her step. She walks on the balls of her feet, trained to leave a room without disturbing it. The parapet cold came off her coat, wet wool and iron. She didn't look at Bren. She looked at the green oak cup, head tilted, as if it might still be speaking. His report says I laid no stone, I said. Who carries the other? I came up that mire as the crown's eyes. She unbuttoned her collar by 1 button, slow. An observer's word reaches the king's desk ahead of any regent's seal. It has to. That's the whole use of us. And if you carry mine, you don't go back to the desk that sent you. No. 1 word, set down flat, and I watched the cost of it travel through her, a tightening at the jaw, the breath held a beat past its use. I came to watch you fail and write it neat. I'll write what stands instead. The dishes, the cured courses, the queue your wall made of frightened people. 200 miles of border that answer to a woman the regent buried. A winter of reading men off a stretched drumhead teaches you the difference between a promise made warm and one made with the warmth gone out of it. Hers had gone out. Better so. Warm promises melt at the first thaw. This one had set like good lime. I turned the cup a quarter on the table, its mouth toward the door now, away from the north. Bren. He flinched at his own name the way the soldier in the old yard had, the one who swore I was a witch. Their order wants a hand inside. They wrote it knowing the hand was yours. They hold my... His ruined fingers curled on the page. Barley dust sat in the seam of his cuff, gray and stubborn. I know who they hold. I've kept the other end of you all winter and never spent it. I held my voice in the soup-quiet register, the one the wood carries clean. Here's the arithmetic, plain. You send back what they're waiting for. Gate opened, frames to the brazier, the lady gone cold in the opening week. Confirm it, and they write up easy, write about everything except the one thing that signs my name off the page. He looked up. Which thing? That you did it for them. I let it sit where he could weigh it. or you send silence. No confirmation, no torn wall, no obedient corpse. And the column climbs into a fort still standing, with a witness on the parapet already writing it down. You can be the man who opened the gate to the truth, or the man who burned a true wall on order and rode south behind it. The brazier ticked through a knot of pine. Under the floor, the single rider was still coming. The snow no argument to a man keeping a bell. Bren wiped his palm down his thigh and laid his good hand flat on the green oak cup. Not to listen this time, to speak into it. "Give me the words," he said. "I'll send them as you want them sent." I put the candle in Coraline's hand and turned her toward the stair. "Ride before the third bell," I said. "Carry what stands." "I have no army." I made myself say it aloud where the cold could hear, breath ghosting off the stone. Because a lie a person tells herself in a crisis is the most expensive thing she will ever buy. 14 masons. A scatter of refugees who go stiff at the sight of a horse. Against that, on the white shoulder of the ridge, the column came on in single file. The lead rider a furlong up and breaking crust to his mount's knee. So, not force. To meet a sword you need a worse sword, and my armory ran to chisels and a barrel of green lime. Pretending otherwise would line my people up to die brave and straight. I had not built a fort to die tidy in. I climbed the east tower and stood at the focus. It is a strange place, the focus of a true dish. A hand's width off the curved stone. The one point in the cold air where every sound the bowl gathers ties itself into a knot you can feel against your mouth. I had cured this one first. I stood in it now, let the ridge wind pour off the rim and collect at my lips, and thought about what the regent had done wrong. He had spoken in the dark. The order to bury me, to blind the king, to call a standing thing a ruin. All of it sent down a channel he believed no one could open. A man will say anything into a sealed room. The bill comes when the seal turns out to be a lie. I had spent the winter learning to open sealed rooms. Darn. He came up the stair before the second call, mortar gray past the elbow, the fire's bread smell still on him. I laid my hand flat on the frozen lip of the dish. Swing them, all of them. East onto Greycowl, the high one onto the crown's relay, the west down into the yard where the queue can hear. He looked at the bowls, not at me, the way he always gave his yeses to the work and not the woman who ordered it. Point it out, he said. Not in. Out. Opened at the third bell. Every one, and not a breath before. To catch what? To send. I turned the nearest dish a finger's width on its bed and felt the grind of frost grit under stone. When their man stands in my hall and gives his quiet little order to tear me down, he gives it to the whole march at once. Greycowl hears it. The queue hears it. The king's own readers hear their regent in his own voice, selling the door he was set to guard. Dern was quiet a moment. Something moved in his jaw that I had learned to read as a man revising upward what he thought a thing could do. That's not a wall, he said. No, a wall stops one man. I took my hand off the stone. The cold had gone clean through the glove to the bone of my palm. This makes one man's whisper everybody's business. He brought force up my hill. I'll answer with witnesses he can't unmake. He went down to wake the others. I stayed in the focus a while longer. Below me the dishes came round, one at a time, as the men set their shoulders to them. 6 curved mouths of pale stone canting into the wind, frost bright on every rim. All turned the same way now, outward and open, waiting on a bell. On the white slope the rider climbed, a dark stitch drawn slowly through the snow, carrying up to me an order he still believed was private. The rider reached the gate and did not dismount. He sat his blown horse a length from the timber and let the column close at his back, fanning into the only flat ground my hill allowed, a half-moon of beaten snow under the high tower, near enough that a man at the parapet could count the rivets on a breastplate. He meant me to count them. That was his whole argument, arranged in iron, left to speak for itself. "Lady Sevra!" Not a shout. A clerk's voice, pitched to carry exactly as far as it was paid to, and no farther. "By the regent's hand, open this gate and come down." I stayed in the focus and read him the way I read a wall before I trust it. The patience first. He did not look up. He looked at the gate, as a man looks at a drawer he already holds the key to. His glove never left the rein. Behind him the column kept its file, no order to spread, no order to ready, because spreading and readying are for an enemy, and he had not been sent against an enemy. He had been sent against a sick woman and a heap of stone. "You have 14 men with trowels," he said, into the silence I gave him. "I have the regent's seal and 100 who keep their oaths. Spare us the arithmetic." I have always liked arithmetic. I did not tell him so. "Open it yourself," he went on, almost gentle, "and the report is mercy. A lady taken in good order, a fort that yielded. Keep it shut, and the report writes itself another way, and you will not be present to dispute the wording." There it was, the whole sentence he carried, the same one I had pulled off the wire in reverse, dressed now in courtesy and snow. Surrender or be erased. He believed those the only 2 doors because he could see only 2. He had never stood in a focus and felt a quarter-mile of air tie itself to his mouth. I did not go down to the gate. To go down was to make this a thing between 2 people, his iron and my empty hands, settled in the language he had brought up the hill. I had spent the winter refusing that language. I put my palm flat to the cold lip of the dish instead, and felt, far below, the faint grind of 6 stones holding their new angles against the wind. "Bren," I said. Quiet. The focus took it and carried it down the tower's throat to the gatehouse, where he waited with his hand near the bar. He had a choice now that no plan of mine could make for him. He could throw the bar and speak the rider through as the regent had ordered, gate open, dishes down, corpse confirmed, and ride south a forgiven man. Or he could open it the way I needed it opened, to a single rider, alone, into a hall whose mouths all pointed out and waited on a bell that had not yet rung. The same act, 2 reports, everything balanced on which set of words his good hand laid into the green oak cup. "Open to him alone," I murmured to the stone. "Then say it as it is." Below, the bar lifted. I heard the iron sing in its bracket and the timber drag on frozen grit, the gate parting one slow hand's width onto the dark of the yard. The rider gathered his rein and walked his horse toward the gap, unhurried, certain, into the only door he thought I had. I waited for Bren's voice to follow him in. It did not come. The shod hoof struck the threshold stone and rang it once, then nothing. Bren's good hand stayed off the cup, and the yard held the particular quiet that comes when a man waits on a promised word, and the word does not arrive. The rider felt it before I did. His head came up at last, the first time all morning he had looked higher than the gate, and behind his eyes I watched a small arithmetic run. A confirmation was overdue. He did not yet understand it would never be paid. Then the 3rd bell. Dern swung the striker himself. I felt the bronze through the parapet before I heard it, a long shudder up into my bad feet, and on the 3rd stroke I leaned to the focus and set my mouth to its cold lip. I did not raise my voice. I used the one I keep for calling the masons in to soup, low, even, a voice sized for a small, warm room. "This is Sevra at Harrowmore," I said. hear what the regent sent 100 men up my hill to bury." Then I gave them his own words, not mine. I had carried them off the wire all winter and kept them whole. And now I let them go, flat as a steward reading stores. Haldor will not last the thaw. A permanent regency, signed and sealed, before the border is sold south. The lady at the fort reported dead of frost. The king kept blind. 6 mouths on my hill threw it into the wind. The 7th, the dish at Greycowl I had taught to answer, caught the breath of it and threw it again, down the white valley to the next throat, and the next. The rider's glove finally left the rein. I watched the whole order of it. He turned in the saddle toward his column, as though the danger had got in among his own men. It had not. It was in the air now, going 7 ways at once, into every cot and chapel and grain shed with a wall to catch sound. And a wall catches whether or not it consents. He shouted something. I could not read the shape of it, and the shape did not matter. You cannot order 100 men to ride down a sentence already across a river. A soldier at the back of the Half Moon broke file and looked south, the direction the sound had gone. Another followed his eyes. The neat iron arc I had been meant to stand and count began, very quietly, to come apart at the joins. Not from any charge of mine, only from men turning their faces toward a thing they could not stop hearing. The clerk found me on the parapet at last. "Take it down." The paid distance was gone from his voice. It carried too far now and cracked on the cold. "Whatever you are doing up there, take it down." "It isn't on my hill anymore," I said. "It's in Greycowl. It's at the monastery at Fen. By the time you reach your horse, it will be past the ford." I let that settle on him. "You came to make me vanish without a sound. You'll have to explain instead why you marched a column up to silence a sick woman who only repeated what your master already said." He had nothing arranged for that. I had read it in him a full minute before he found it in himself, the weight already shifting back toward the gap, toward leaving, while his mouth still reached for a command that had run out of teeth. Below, Bren stepped from the gatehouse shadow into the throne glare off the snow. Bad hand tucked, good hand open and empty at his side. He looked up the tower at me. He had laid no word into the cup at all, and his silence had turned out to be the loudest thing on the hill. Mira pressed her ear to the east dish and went still. Then she lifted her face to me, and her hands moved fast. "It's coming back." Faint through the focus, off the wind, my borrowed sentence returned up the valley in a stranger's mouth, thrown on from Greycowl to the next tower, and the next. The border, wide awake, sang it back. The thaw came in the 2nd week of spring and carried the column's footprints off down the mire, one boot hollow at a time, until the hill forgot it had been climbed. What it left behind was a market. I stood on the parapet I had refused to come down from and read the yard the only way left to me, by its angles. Where the bodies bunched, a price was being argued. Where they finned and moved quick, someone had brought news. A woman from Greycowl set her basket on the cistern lid, and a dozen heads tipped toward her at once. Whatever she carried was worth more than eggs. I could not hear a word of it. I have not heard a word in 9 years, and spring did not amend that. Mira read it for me. She sat with her back to the warm stone, palm flat to the dish foot, and her hands gave me the shape of the crowd in quick small signs. Grain, a berth at Fen, a question about whether the king's writ would name us anything at all. It had named us nothing yet. That suited me. A place with no name on a crown ledger is a place no regent can quietly inherit. Harrowmore was neither his to take nor a banner for anyone to march under. Only a hill where a voice went out and came back, and where the wall caught sound whether or not the speaker meant to be heard. Bren crossed the yard with a sack of lime on his good shoulder. He had stayed. I never asked him to, and I never stopped him, and somewhere between those two failures of courtesy, he had become a mason. The bad hand still hung wrong. He set the sack by the slaking trough and looked up, the old reflex, checking whether his silence had cost what he feared, and I gave him the smallest nod a person can give and still mean it. He went back to the lime. That was the debt, paid in nods. It would never be settled, and we both preferred it so. Coraline came up the tower stair near noon, mud to the knee, the king's answer folded inside her coat. "He had it from my own mouth," she said, turning so I could take the words off her lips, the way she'd learned without my asking. "I checked the room first. No sealed channel this time. Just him, and a window, and me." "And?" "He is angry at the right man, for once." She weighted a fold of paper to the parapet with a stone so the wind couldn't have it. "It isn't a pardon. It's worse for them than a pardon. It's a question with my name on it, and yours, sent down to the regent's own desk." I did not reach for the paper. I reached for her cold hand instead and folded it between both of mine, the way I'd warm a chisel before fine work, and she let me, which a winter ago she would not have. There had been a season when touching her was a wager I could lose everything on. The wager was finished. What remained was the warmth, earned the slow way, paid out in degrees like lime coming up to heat. Below us the market thickened. Mir's hands kept moving, a dispute over a goat, then laughter, then someone calling Dern's name across the yard. I would never hear it. I had built a hill the whole border listened to, and I would stand on top of it deaf to my own crowd until they laid me in the lime. I turned my good ear south anyway, toward the road off the mire and whatever the king's question would stir up next. Coraline followed my look. "More of them coming?" "Probably." I felt new lime curing somewhere under my feet, slow and certain. We'll have walls enough by autumn to hold whoever does. The bell rope hung still. For once, I left it that way and stood listening, not with my ears, to a hill that no longer needed me to make a sound.